What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with what I had planned to be a quick video, but will probably end up being kind of lengthy. I had a friend of mine send me a wonderful gift, and it is a graded bootleg to go along with my Russian Oritet bootlegs. And for those of you unfamiliar with the line, I do have a video that kind of covers these in more detail. And if I remember, I'll put a link to that video in the video description to this video. But he sent me one I did not have as a gift. And he was kind of, I guess, thanking me for putting him in touch with a trusted buyer for his loose graded collection. I think that Stu, his name, he decided to get out of kind of the loose graded figures. And so he sold off his collection with my help to a trusted buyer. And he sent me one of them. It was a graded Oritet bootleg as a thank you. And I'm going to kind of segue that into showing you guys the ones that are already in my collection, and also segue from Russian bootlegs from 1995 to about 2003-ish, 2006-ish, somewhere in there, to some 1980s Mexican bootlegs. So I just want to say thanks to Stu, and we'll get to that item in a second. But I did want to go ahead and show you guys, maybe some of you who are new to the channel are not familiar with this line. These bootlegs came out in Russia, and most of them use the Power of the Force 2 molds from the Hasbro/Kenner line from 1995 to 2005. So these Russian bootlegs really started in the 1990s with one that I'll show you in a second, but most of them are like this, where they're very clearly based off the Power of the Force 2 line. So this is Chewbacca, and I had this one custom encased with an unassembled, unpainted, or I guess not unpainted, but unfinished figure. I think it might be painted in brown, or it might just be molded in brown plastic. I have never really looked at it that closely. But all the arms and the legs and the blaster, or the bowcaster, and the torso are all on a sprue, never assembled. And then I also had it included with 3 different variations of the Russian Oritet bootleg Chewbacca. There's kind of the standard brown, there's like a magenta-ish kind of color, and then a gold version. And the gold version did not come with a gold bowcaster. If anyone asks, the brown came with a brown, the magenta came with a magenta, but the gold came with also the magenta. And I think there's maybe 2 or 3 other slight variations to some of the colors that are available out there, but these are kind of the main 3. And I had CAS custom encase this, and they list it from the 2000s Oritet bootleg, including one on the factory sprue, graded 85 overall for that setup. But the earliest Oritet bootleg is this one, and you can see it doesn't really match that much. I guess maybe it could with the Power of the Force 2 line. I'm not familiar with what the AT-AT driver looks like from the Power of the Force line, but he's so thin that I would wager that this kind of came out before they really started copying the Kenner/Hasbro molds from the Power of the Force 2 line. But this is kind of their first one, and there are some variations for this AT-AT driver. He came with kind of this oversized ray gun that almost looks like some kind of Buck Rogers toy. But this one is silver, and I got this one from a seller in Russia, and it was kind of a complicated Facebook transaction, I believe. And luckily, it did arrive safe and sound, and it graded with CAS a 90+. Now, CAS lists this as 2003, which is what most of the Oritet bootlegs have for kind of their VAT tax or government tax on the back of the card backs. It's like a 2003 stamp, but this one is from the 1990s. This is not a 2003, and I think CAS has updated it since then, but AFA still labels this as 2003 for the AFA graded examples I've seen. But this is the AT-AT driver from the same company, Oritet Limited, but this was a 90+. I couldn't believe I got this from Russia and sent it into CAS, and it did get a 90+, but it was pretty much flawless. Very cool. I think I got it from someone who used to work at the factory. Now, I'll leave this one out for a second because this is one that you can see it's much more rudimentary. This is not an Oritet bootleg. This is very clearly some kind of weird copy. I've read, I think it was on swca.com's bootleg section on the Russian Oritet bootleg, that they think that somebody stole the mold or, stole this figure and decided to make their own molds. And you can see that the arms have a bigger space there, probably because they had to kind of, use an existing mold or use an existing kind of setup and it just came out a lot more rudimentary. But this one is labeled a 1990s Russian bootleg. It's not labeled as Oritet at my request because it's not an Oritet bootleg. This is some other company that basically copied the Oritet version in Russia. And this one came back with an 80. I bought this one on eBay from a Russian seller. So there are different colors available for the silver version. There's one with a black torso and blue limbs. And I'm sure there's other examples out there. I can't remember off the top of my head, but some of the bootleg guys in the bootleg group, they have, several different carded examples that have really wacky card backs. But this is one that, is probably a bootleg of a bootleg or something similar like that. And the weapon is molded into his hand. So it's very, it's a very strange bootleg that, based on my information that I found online I think it was in the SWCA kind of forums, or it might have been on Rebel Scum, I can't remember. But it does date back to the same time period as the silver AT-AT driver from the Oritet factory. The one that you guys probably know the most is the Bossk. This is the pink Bossk that you see everywhere. And, this is kind of the most common one from 2003. It's labeled 2000s, but this is one that you could find on card with the Russian kind of government tax stamp on the back of the card back that is labeled 2003, I believe. This one's got a 90. Here are the other two that I'm sure you guys remember from my channel that are much more rare. These are probably some sort of kind of test paint when they were first designing the final one, which was the pink Bossk. They were probably trying to figure out a way to make it more enticing to kids, would be my guess. I am completely guessing on that. I have no way to prove that. But there were carded examples of the green one for sure. I don't know if there's ever been a carded example of the orange. But I know that for these two, that they're very rare. I mean, this is probably one of 3 or 4 that have survived and known to exist. And same with the orange. And I've seen some others in some collections of friends of mine that have these either graded or, authenticated from AFA or, one of the other companies. But these are very rare, and these are 2 that I did pick up. This one I picked up on eBay, and this one I picked up from a Russian seller, and we just worked it out over Facebook. So anyway, just a couple of really cool gems, and they're all graded 90. But I would guess that these 2 are probably late 90s kind of factory test shots as they were finalizing what color they wanted to use for the Bossk, and they settled on hot pink. And so here is the last one, and the latest, and this is one that Stu sent me as a gift. This is the Oritet Yoda, and he's massive. He was way bigger than I was expecting, but I guess I should have expected it because these are based on the Power of the Force 2 line, which they're bigger figures. So he's got that kind of weird metallic green color that coincidentally is very similar to this factory test shot. It's very, very similar, and it makes me wonder if they decided to not confuse the market by not making these Bosks with green and instead use it for Yoda, and this one just happens to be a survivor as they were doing different test paints. But it is very similar. It's eerily similar in terms of the color. So I'm guessing that's what happened, is that they decided, well, let's not have 2 green figures. Let's make Bossk first. Maybe they tried the metallic kind of oily orange, and then they probably thought it was too expensive to use that kind of paint app, and so they just went with the hot pink and have it just a totally different color. But this Oritet Yoda is only known to come in this color, to my knowledge. There are some fakes out there, so you got to be careful. They're labeled as Oritet bootlegs or bootleg Yodas, but they are just modern customs that are not in this kind of very factory-specific metallic green color. But this one is graded 85 plus, and Stu sent this to me as a gift, along with another one that I'll show you in a second. That was one I gifted to him, and then he sent it back to me as a, I don't want to sell this, I'm going to give it back to you. So I thought that was kind of funny. So we'll show that Mexican bootleg in a second. But going back to how large this Yoda is, I've got next to it, as we segue into some Mexican bootlegs, this Mexican 1980s necklace bootleg for Yoda is very similar in size to what the licensed Kenner Yoda is like. It's very, very similar. But you can see just how massive the Oritet bootleg is for Yoda and how much more detailed the sculpt is and things like that relative to the Mexican bootleg Yoda necklace for the 1980s in Mexico. So you can see it's got a little hole there on, I forget to focus here. We've got a little hole there on his head, and so kids were supposed to kind of wear it as a necklace, and it did come with a cane and utility belt and snake and all that stuff, and there's lots of different colors available. So one other point on the Bossk is that just to show you how similar the mold is, if I can get it to stay focused here. So this is the Oritet Bossk, and then next to it I included the first shot prototype Power of the Force 2 Bossk. So it's very, very similar and pretty much a straight copy, and it shows you how good the Oritet company was with their copying of the Kenner mold. I mean, it's almost an exact replica, and it just shows you that that the Russian Oritet company's kind of factory molds that they used were very spot on, and it's very similar. But this is the first shot prototype of Bossk from the Power of the Force 2 line next to the Oritet. So now we're going to segue into some other bootlegs. So I just showed you the 1980s necklace, and so while we have Bossk out, I did, just pull out some others, and I don't know why I'm showing you all these. I think it's just kind of to give some of the new collectors out there, or new viewers, I should say, a look at some of these. But these are probably 1990s, if I had to guess, Mexican bootleg Bosks. They have arms that are articulated, the legs are not. And then this one is a 1980s, and you can see how much different and more, how much worse the paint color is on it. Also, the plastic is a totally different type of plastic used. It's much more transparent, and that's usually a good tell that you're dealing with 1980s until they got into better molds and better quality plastic with the 1990s version. So these are much more solid in color, and they're both kind of a darker yellow, much more solid, and you can tell by then that the paint apps were getting pretty wacky. So the 1980s version is kind of a more translucent plastic, and they used very similar to the Kenner mold as well, and the paint didn't stay on very well on this one. This one's only graded a 50, but when I saw it for sale on eBay, I knew immediately that it was a 1980s Bossk versus the two I had in my collection, which are really 1990s Bosks. So, but Stu anyway returned to me one of my 1990s Bib Fortunas, and here are the three that I already had in my collection. I had an unpainted, I had a silver painted with the original cape, and then I had a darker blue with the gray paint apps. And then Stu sent back to me this one, which was very similar to the one I already had with the cape, and I gave this to him as a gift 3 or 4 years ago, or it might have been more like 8 years ago. I can't remember when. When was this graded? This one was graded in 2019, so it was around there, 2019, so that would be 4 years ago. I was right. And, so I already had one that had the original cape, and I was like, well, I don't need two, so I'll send this to Stu as a gift. And so he sent it back to me. He just he felt bad selling it along with the other graded items that he had, so he sent me this one back along with the Yoda. So I've got 4 again of these Mexican bootleg Bib Fortunas. Now, these, I think, for the most part, are all early 1990s. And the mold is exactly the same between the 1980s and the 1990s, but I would wager that most bootleg collectors would call these 1990s in terms of the paint schemes and things like that. But I do have 4 different kinds, so that's pretty cool. I think if I ever sold these, I would just say, hey, look, some of these labels say 1980s, some of them say 1990s. They're all I consider them all to be 1990s. Some other big hitter bootlegs from the Mexican line in my collection, and they're different lines that I have, but this is a big one. This is an unpainted 1980s semi-articulated biker scout. It's very tough to find these, and they're very pricey even now. This one's graded 75, semi-articulated from the 1980s. I got this one from a trusted bootleg expert, Jason H. And these are very, very desirable biker scout bootlegs from Mexico. Some other ones I picked up over the years. Here is, I consider this to be part of the raised arm line, although This one doesn't really have any raised arms relative to the ones I'm going to show you in a little while, but you know, there was a lot of these kind of bootlegs from the 1980s that are static, and that's what I call them. They don't have arms or legs that move. You know, Mexico was, you know, it's a relatively poor country back then, and the bootleggers could just knock these out for probably, you know, 5 cents. And so now they're very desirable, though. They're not as desirable as the articulated ones, but this is one I picked up from my buddy Andrew, and he bought like 3 or 4 of these in one sitting from a seller down in Mexico, and he said, hey, you want to buy one from me just to help offset the cost? And I said, sure, I'll take the blue one if you don't want it. And so this one got a 75. This is definitely a 1980s example of the squid head. Very desirable, but not as desirable as this squid head. This is one I received as a gift, believe it or not, ungraded, from a subscriber who had like 15 of these. It was unbelievable. These originally came in baggies that were given out as like children's gifts at birthday parties. But in the baggie would be a squid head that had articulation to the arms, along with a cape, and then along with a bootleg belt and weapon also. So these are very desirable. There's several different examples. There's ones with white capes, pink capes, and slightly different plastic colors, but very desirable one. And this one graded 80. And, you know, this is just one of those incredible gifts that I don't even know what to say when I got it. A very desirable 1980s squid head that is semi-articulated with all the accessories from the licensed one. Going back to the raised arm or the static ones, I've got a Luke Bespin. That one is graded 80. I have a raised arm Gamorrean Guard, and you can see these kind of like gaps in the armpit area that the raised arm bootlegs are known for. They basically just straight copy the mold and from the Kenner line, and so they're very rudimentary kind of bootlegs. But this one's graded 80 plus. I got these 2 from a trusted seller down in Mexico. Another gift that is from a different line. These are in black rubber. This is Neon Numb with the blaster kind of welded to his hand, or, you know, molded into his hand. But there are a number of different kind of these black rubber bootlegs. There's an R2-D2, a Han Bespin, a Luke Bespin, and a Han Solo Bespin that I know of, and also a C-3PO, that were made in these kind of rubberized, kind of just straight black, very crude static bootlegs. But this one was given as a gift to me, already graded CAS 80. But this is Neon Numb from that line. So that's a totally different line than some of these other static raised arm bootlegs. Some other raised arm bootlegs. This is Reese. You can see the big gap there, and these are static again. And I've got another Neon Numb that is also kind of one of those raised arm, static in bright yellow. That's kind of a cool one. Lots of detail on the figure there. You can see all the kind of little hash marks. Those were actually in the mold. Those are not scratches to the figure, but very, very cool looking bootleg. That one's graded 85 plus. And here's one I grabbed on eBay and had graded myself. It's a weird Klaatu that had this factory sprue still attached to the arm that looks awfully phallic. But this is another one from the raised arm 1980s bootlegs. You can see some injection points on his chest there. That was probably some sort of where they injected the mold when these were originally made. So this is in hot pink, and it was graded in 80. Lots of different colors for these raised arm bootlegs, and very desirable. But again, these are a lot cheaper now than when I bought a lot of these. A lot of these have really kind of gone down in value because people view them as more crude and not as desirable as the articulated bootlegs. But this is Han Bespin, was the last one I pulled out. I've got others, but I just wanted to kind of say thank you to Stu by showing that Oritet Yoda, and just talking a little bit briefly about some of the other bootlegs in my collection that I've had and added over the years. And I don't really bring out my collection a lot, but I thought it would be kind of an appropriate time to do that, given this awesome Oritet Yoda graded CES 85 plus that Stu was so kind enough to send me as a gift. So thank you again, Stu. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching.